Who's ready? Okay, I was waiting for you. I was waiting for you guys. So just in case anybody was asking. Okay, Parshat Vayera. There's a Parshat Vayera, which is a little different than this one. You know, what you need to know are some key central themes of this Parsha. Okay, so Moshe is being, he's getting a talking to from the Lord. You know, it's this I revealed, right? It's the Lord revealing himself to Moshe. And he starts off by saying, you know, who he is, and then I have heard the grumbling. I have heard the cry of my people. And so what does Moses learn from this first interaction? First of all, fiery bushes and caves kind of can freak someone out. Second of all, he learns, as of course he's a shepherd this time of his life, that there is a God. He is unseen, and he is the God of Moses. Moses isn't just revealed who God is in this moment. Moses is revealed more about who he is in this moment. I am your God, and I am the God of your fathers. That's what's revealed to Moses. Now, of course, when we go through Parshat Vayera and Parshat Bo next week, I'll actually be in Oklahoma next weekend, so we're going to have Nico go ahead and share about Parshat Bo. We see that it goes through the whole story of the Exodus quite quickly. I mean, you know, Prince of Egypt, they did it in about a couple hours, but for some reason you can read these whole portions pretty quickly, and you go boom, 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 you know, plagues, you know, Pharaoh, Red Sea, here we go, no more Red Sea opening, and now we're in the, like, all of this can just go by so quickly, so it's easy to just pass over these things. Oh, Passover, well, we're not there yet. And here in this portion, we see 7 of the 10. What is it? Plagues? Some say 7 of the 10 judgments upon Pharaoh. You know, last week we talked about the ethics of a godly leader, right? Remember that? We talked about how empathy is very important, not just for congregational leadership or any ministry role or even political leadership. We talked about how empathy is an important quality for the individual in any relationship. Anybody in some sort of relationship, even if it's with a friend or a child, we're all in a relationship with somebody, even if it's a bad relationship. We find that empathy is key to that. And today we're going to focus on something a little bit different, and then we're going to hang on that for a minute and then go straight back into the portion, and it's something we call sympathy. Now we're probably already thinking, what? We talked about empathy. Why are we going to talk about sympathy, Mike? I mean, I can smell the lunch already. You know, most of our conversations, empathy and sympathy, are used simultaneously, right? These words actually have difference, though. Where empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of another and embodying another, if you will, so you can internalize their situation, sympathy is the actual feeling of compassion, of sorrow, of guilt, of pity, of shame or joy, essentially feeling the hardships of another who you encounter. Empathy can be more cognitive, where sympathy is more of the heart. So does empathy work if you don't also have sympathy? Well, you can kind of understand what somebody's going through, right? But to feel what they're going through is another level. Sympathy, of course, being the root of empathy, it's the experience of emotional shift based on another's emotional state of being. Have you ever walked into a room and you thought, man, somebody is sad in this room? You ever walked into a room and instantly felt depressed and you didn't know why? Maybe it's because it was the DMV and you saw the line, you know? Have you ever walked into, you know, it's easy to walk into Chick-fil-A and feel hungry, but have you ever walked into a room or you walk into a congregation and you feel peace? You know, I come here several times. Sometimes I'm here 3, 6, 8 hours a day during the weekday. I'm getting some work done here in the cafe, or counseling with people, or being counseled by people, or I'm just here spending time with people. I even have business meetings and whatnot. Sometimes I'm here and just here to pray and find some solitude in life. But there's something in this building, and it is spirit of shalom. And peace isn't just quiet and everyone's shutting up. Peace in Hebrew is a completeness. The people who go to the church here Sunday morning, several of them have told me, since you guys have been here, we have felt a spirit of peace in this building. Is that something we could do by ourselves? Have you ever been somewhere where you go and you feel excitement? You show up somewhere and you know you're riled up. You could just like smell the adrenaline. I don't know. It might smell like Red Bull. I'm not sure. But you go in and you just kind of jacked up. You're excited because someone's excited, or you go into a situation, you know you're there someone, and you can almost feel the hormones of cortisol kind of essence, and you feel stressed, and they're stressed, and your anxiety, your heart rate goes up, and your adrenal glands start palpitating, and I've got anxiety, and why? I don't know. Many studies have been shown by Harvard and different universities. Well, they will have an individual think and feel these certain emotions, but try not to express it on their face. They come, they sit in a room, and they're quiet. They don't say a word. And somebody else comes in, and they sit down, and they just stare at each other, just in the room. And this person starts thinking maybe of this terrible thing that happened in their childhood. They're there for 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long it takes. And then they ask the person, ask the people to leave the room, and the individual came in, and they both said nothing. Said, "What did you feel?" And they go, "I'm just really, really upset. I'm just really depressed. I've got an anxiety. I feel down. I can't explain it." There's this thing that it is a transference of emotion. Part of it is physiological, of course. Different chemicals and hormones go off in our brain and in our bodies when we're going through these different emotions. And whether you know it or not, your body can pick up those sometimes vibrations, sometimes those hormones, sometimes those just that feeling. And a lot of times it's also spiritual. Sometimes you come into a situation and you don't feel safe. And somebody in that situation feels really safe. They've got things figured out. They feel really solid. They're okay. And you just rest in, he's okay. She's okay. I'm okay. Oftentimes, it's unexplainable. It's unexplainable. People come in Shabbat morning here, and we have all different emotions and feelings left over from the week, baggage from the week. Who was mistreated this week? Who was lied to this week? Who was abused this week? And you come in and you don't have to say a thing, but we usually do say something. And you know what it is? I'm fine. As in, I don't want to open up to you because I don't trust you. I don't trust myself. Maybe you won't understand. Maybe you won't have sympathy for my situation. Exodus 6:5. Shemot 6:5 says, "Moreover, this is the Lord speaking, I have also heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians are keeping in slavery, and I have remembered my covenant." The Hebrew text uses the word also. Obviously in Hebrew it's not also, it's also in English. The Chassam Sofer, who is, his name was Rabbi Moshe Sofer, he explains why the also is included in this verse and not just some unneeded word as it might be to the quick Bible reader. He says that by using the word also, it infers that God heard the groanings of the people, but he also heard that the people heard the groanings from their brethren. The people had already known each other's emotion, and God also felt that emotion. I don't know any being more empathetic or sympathetic than God. And just in case you didn't believe so, he came down in the flesh that he may dwell with us and live and be abused and beaten and even murdered by us, so that we cannot, it strips us of the ability to say, you don't know what I'm going through. Because whatever we are going through, he has gone through first. This also states that God says, I did not forget my covenant. Have you ever felt like God forgets his promises sometimes? God, you promised this would happen. That I would have a big family, that I would have a perfect marriage, that I would have a great job, I would be successful, that I would have great health. I thought these were promises. At least that's what Joel Osteen told me. That these are the promises of the Lord. Have you did I say that? I'm so sorry to cuss up here. Man makes these promises, don't we? We sell God as if everything's going to be perfect, don't we? And it feels often like God forgets his promises and his covenants to us, because we may not see it in this current season of our life. But does God actually forget his covenant? Does God forget his promises? Sometimes he's waiting for us to be ready to receive those blessings and promises. Give $1 million to a 12-year-old, and you'll see quickly what it's like to give blessings to someone who's not ready for it. Oftentimes, you give people who win the lottery and win millions of dollars, even in adulthood, you'll find that many of them end up in debt within a few years because of poor financial choices. They weren't ready for that blessing. That blessing wasn't from God. That blessing was from some government or some lottery agency. In this situation, we find that we are enslaved by the Egyptians, right? Not a very good time. You know, God encourages us oftentimes in Scripture, and even today he encourages me to not be so wrapped up in my own problems that I forget to sympathize for others who are in the same problems. It reminds us, you know, here in the text we see that Israel had sympathy for Israel. Man had sympathy for his brother. Man had sympathy for his child, for his parent, because they were all enslaved. It wasn't just a poor me, it was a poor us. And that is the national mindset that Israel has always had, that no other nation in the world has truly grasped. When we sing the national anthem, it's not a restoration of self, it's about a restoration of a nation dwelling in the land that was promised by God. All of these promises and these covenants from God are not for the individual, but for his people as a nation. So doesn't it make sense when we praise his name as a nation? There was a rabbi named Simcha Zizel Ziv. All right, I didn't name him, okay? You kind of sound like you're opening a can of soda, right? But Simcha Zizel Ziv. Now he had there was a custom that the family had, and it was collecting money for the poor at funerals. Just kind of an old Jewish thing. And you know, when you're in that situation, and when you're in any situation where you're sad, you know, it's good to give. It kind of gets you out of that sadness of self and reminds you that we're going through this together. The mother of this rabbi, Simcha, one of the funerals, it was actually her job to collect the money at funerals, and one of those funerals in particular, it was very close to her. It was her daughter who had passed away. And when asked how she was still able, at the pinnacle of her grief, to still collect these donations for the poor, she said, "Just because I am suffering doesn't mean that the poor have to suffer also." Yes. There's that word. Also. Sympathy is the also. Our Master Yeshua has certainly left us many examples on how to follow this concept. He himself is described in Yeshayahu, Isaiah. You can find this in Isaiah 53, 3-7. This describes our Messiah, a man of pains, well acquainted with illness. Though mistreated, he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to be slaughtered, like a sheep silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth. Those are different excerpts of those verses. Fully aware of what Messiah had in front of him in the next few days in Jerusalem, he stopped on his way to comfort Lazarus' two sisters who had just lost their brother. Yochanan, John, he records in that moment, in Yochanan 11:35, Yeshua cried. What sympathy did our Savior have? The one who leads us by example. What sympathy. Anticipating the soon coming destruction of the temple and of the city, even at the height of his suffering, he made sure to sympathize with his people. Luke 23:28, daughters of Yushalayim, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves and your children. What sympathy. While he himself unjustly hanging on a tree, he cared for the thief who, admitting his guilt, begged to be remembered. Luke 23:42. Then he, the thief, said, Yeshua, remember me when you come as king. Yeshua said to him, yes, I promise that you will be with me today in Gan Eden. What sympathy. Finally, just before the end, our Messiah, Yeshua, also made sure that his mother, as well as his young disciple, would be cared for after his leave. John, Yochanan 19:26-27, when Yeshua saw his mother and the Talmud whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, Mother, this is your son. Then he said to his Talmud, his disciple, this is your mother. And from that time on, the Talmud took her into his own home. What sympathy. If it was me up there, I could barely imagine, but if it was me up there, I would probably ask for a drink of water. I would probably ask for help getting down. I would probably ask for some kind of bandage for my wound. But his focus was not on his own suffering. His focus was on the other's suffering, so that his suffering may also be ours. So his sacrifice might also be ours. His sacrifice of his own life. In Rav Shaul's letter to the Romans in 12:15, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. As humans, we sometimes can't help but doing that. Has anybody ever seen a sad movie? Listen, some people who know me personally know that dogs are great. You know, I like Maxie over here, but I'm not the biggest fan of dogs. I don't know what it is. We just can't get along. I've tried. I've had dog after dog after dog. I've had Chihuahuas. I've had a Mastiff. I've had things in between. I grew up with the little Pekingese thing. What are those little fuzzballs? Those things? Looks like it ran into a door real hard. We've got a pug living in my house. I don't know how that happened. It's not even ours. Not the biggest dog guy. Definitely not. Very un-Coloradan of me, right? There was a trailer I watched before a movie. I don't remember the movie, but it was called like a dog story or something like that, where this dog was trying to find this dog, like died and was reincarnated as another dog and was trying to find this kid. And I just poured out in tears in this trailer. Like, the stupid dog came back to find the kid. Isn't it? And then the dog just looks up with these dog eyes, there, and it's sacrificing itself for this kid. And I go, oh, look at the little fuzzy puppy, its nose. Didn't matter that I don't like dogs. Maxie, you're okay. Is he over there? He's sleeping? That's when I like dogs. And Hebrew Nationals, another dog that I like. Oh, God, that was a groan. I know, that was worse than one of Nico's jokes. But I watched this struggle of this dog in this trailer and wept like a baby. Because there's a part of God within us, the Shekinah, the glory of God that dwells within us, that has more sympathy, empathy, and compassion that we could ever bear. If we truly had even more of this essence of God, we would feel the emotions of others so intently, we probably wouldn't be able to focus on anything. We wouldn't be able to watch a movie and even see the bad guy die in the end of the movie without bursting out in tears, even if the bad guy was evil the whole film. if we truly had the sympathy of God. When we read through these stories of the plagues, we should still have the sympathy of God. Do not be mistaken and think for a moment that God was cheering and praising with the angels when the water came in and crushed Pharaoh's army. Do not think for a moment that our God rejoiced when the firstborn sons of Egypt were killed. Don't think that God enjoyed sprinkling these 7 plagues all over Egypt. Even though he made Pharaoh's heart hard, and if you keep going through the scripture, it actually says that Pharaoh made his own heart hard. Even though Pharaoh would not give in, do not for a moment believe that our God enjoyed Pharaoh's suffering. Our God being sympathetic. Can you imagine what our God went through during the flood? All of the death and screaming and crying out and the drowning in the water. Our God hears the cries of his people, even if it is one person, one death. Cain, where's your brother? For I have heard even the earth cry out in his blood. Don't think God rejoices in the bad guy losing, because the bad guy is also a creation of God. These plagues, as I said, in this portion we see the 7 of the 10 plagues. We often justify our lack of sympathy. This is another issue. We often justify our lack of sympathy by how bad the other person is or how much they deserve it. As you can understand where I'm leading into this. You know, it is easy to feel like the Egyptians got what was coming to them because it was payback for 400 years of enslavement. That's not why God sent the plagues. What if I told you that we enslaved ourselves by agreeing to the high taxation when we ran out of food in Goshen? We ourselves sold ourselves into slavery under Pharaoh. We were not smart in how we ruled the land of Goshen and how we had all of our, it was a beautiful land. It was the best land of Egypt, right? It's not the land of milk and honey, but it's a land of almond milk and corn syrup or something. It's really close. It's close. But we sold our own families, our own future generations into slavery when we allowed ourselves to be under the high taxation of that Pharaoh. What if I told you the plagues also didn't come because of the actions of the Egyptians? That the plagues didn't come for Pharaoh himself, but the plagues came in an attempt that Pharaoh's heart might be softened. Did Pharaoh have the opportunity to say, "Go and worship your God"? Did he have the authority? There's something deep within him that wouldn't allow him. It just wouldn't allow him to set God's people free. Was it pride? Was it arrogance? Was it a lack of sympathy? As I said, we see in the beginning that God himself says, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart." And then you keep reading, and then it says, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. In this ancient Egyptian belief, that they believed that when you died, an Egyptian's heart would be weighed on a scale. On the other side of the scale, an Anubis would be checking it out, they believed, would be a feather. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, you would not go on to the afterlife and not become a deity. Got to understand there are 3 different words in Hebrew used for the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. One is hard, One is strong. One is the word for hard in Hebrew. And for some reason, it's escaping my brain here. I didn't have my notes. But one of the versions says his heart was made chazak, strong. Another part in Hebrew, it says that Pharaoh's heart was made kavod, heavy, glorified. Pharaoh made his own heart heavy so that it would not be lighter than a feather. It's interesting how our God actually uses the teachings of the Egyptians kind of against them, because he's trying to reach them in their own place. It's amazing when you can find these notes online, and it's about the different plagues, the 10 plagues, and which Egyptian deity our God was going after. Of course, the first is we come and say, "Let my people go." Right, we do that, and then that's exactly how Aaron said it, right? And Pharaoh goes, "Nope." God says, "Lay down your staff." Of course, in Prince of Egypt and a lot of modern versions, it says the staff turned into a serpent, a snake, right? Well, in Hebrew, it's tanin. And tanin sometimes is translated to serpent, but oftentimes is translated to crocodile. There's an article that I read many years ago called Moses and His Crocodile. And I found it a very, very interesting, and how there's different studies back and forth. And I thought, now if it's true, and if we read in our original writings, our original scroll, it's tanin, crocodile, which also can be translated to Leviathan. Very interesting, Leviathan. Why would it matter if it was a snake or a crocodile? Well, the Egyptians believed in a deity named Sobek, a man with a crocodile head, sometimes a full crocodile. They believed that Ra and Horus had a son, and it was Sobek. Now, they revered Sobek as king of the Nile, but as also the head of their military, the strength of the warriors of Egypt. And to present a crocodile would be to present war to the Egyptians. Now, of course, what happens? Our crocodile has lunch. Pharaoh again says, "No, I will not let your people free. I will not let your people go. I will not let your people observe the Sabbath. I will not let your people offer sacrifices to your God." Moses goes down to the Nile, right down the bottom of the steps of the palace where they believe that Sobek had lived. They believe he protected the Nile, which was the life source of everything. It was where they got their water. It was where they got the fish. It was where the water that they would build these channels that would grow the reeds, and they would make the papyrus and grow all their vegetation. The Nile was like their central vein, their source of life amongst a great desert. Moses goes down, and some people picture he grabs his staff and he gently dips it in the water. Boop. In the Hebrew, it's more like plunged. I picture Moses taking his staff and plunging it into the water, into the Nile, into this false god of Sobek that they believed was there. And water pours out from there, and the fish die. Sobek is dead. And then the frogs. Their frog god, I think it was Hetek or something like that. I don't need to pronounce them correctly because they're not my gods. But their frog god, or goddess, I believe it was a goddess, was the goddess of fertility. One thing that the Egyptians revered was the fertility of their own people. You got to understand that this isn't a place where you can go down to the hospital and have your kid. We're talking about in a place, even with their magi and all of their wise men and everything, death in childbirth was a very common thing. It's very unfortunate, but very common. But fertility meant we were going to have lots of kids. Women were not going to die in childbirth as much. We're going to be very fertile as a nation. They worshipped this frog god or goddess and said, that is the source of our fertility. What happens next? The plague of the frogs comes in. You want fertility? I will let you know I am the God of Israel. I am the only one who will bring you any fertility. Ribbit, ribbit. And they're flooded by this unclean animal. completely flooded, and the Egyptian holy places covered in frogs. And frogs bring with them a couple different things. Have you ever held a frog? Think of these slippery, gross, slimy bullfrogs, and everywhere they step is this kind of swamp water, and every time they jump, sometimes they pee a little. Some of us have done that sometimes, you know. But the uncleanness of these frogs, the Egyptians liked it all, you know, they had the ShamWows and everything was nice and clean. But these frogs, they bring this slime, this disease, their excrement all over the Egyptian holy places. Then come other plagues. First, they're not so, a little flies, a little couple gnats. Has anybody seen a couple gnats before? You know, you get that one banana from the grocery store and apparently had a couple eggs in it. And sometimes you walk into your kitchen and you go, whoa, we've got a couple. Don't worry, we'll get rid of these. Have you ever walked in an area where there was maybe 10 gnats? Maybe 20? I grew up at the bottom of a valley, 120 feet above sea level. You would walk into what we called a cloud of gnats. You would be going on a nice walk outside or you're near a fruit tree, and before you know it, they're in your mouth. They're all over the place. And the gnats were all over Egypt. A tiny little bug that seems like it's not a big deal represented another Egyptian god. And then there was the boils. A great disease, a great pandemic that went all over Egypt, quicker than COVID, harsher than COVID. It showed up on your skin. Now, the Magi's there in Egypt, they couldn't perform their duties in their temples when they had boils. So now they can't worship their gods at all because they're all covered in these blisters, these painful. Anybody had, like, you burned yourself on accident on the stove or whatever, and you forget about it, and you bump into something and you go, oh yeah! Ouch. I've only sunburned a couple times in my life. I usually just get darker, but there was a couple times I was in Mexico for a couple of weeks, and I wasn't paying attention. We were building homes for people and stuff, and it was actually, we had come up to, before we went back to Oregon, we went to this water park in Denver. Anybody ever been there? Yes. Between that and the water park, I just formed these blisters on my shoulder. Like putting on a t-shirt was excruciating. I couldn't imagine that all over my body. These attacks on Egypt, on the slaves of Egypt, these attacks on the cattle of Egypt and the horses of Egypt, these attacks on the people, on the health of the people, on the wealth of Egypt, the servants of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh himself, were all because of one thing. Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh's lack of sympathy. I pray that we don't make the same mistakes and have lack of sympathy towards each other. I saw this, it goes all over social media once in a while, and I love seeing it. It says, be nice to people today, you don't know what they're going through. Has anybody ever had a pretty bad day and somebody comes up and just bugs you about something small? And it's kind of the camel that broke the straw's back. The straw, I don't know, put a camel on my back, might break too. The straw that broke the camel's back. It was that one little thing that your wick was already this short. Anybody ever been there? You come home, you're upset. You need to relax, you need to rest, you need to, And your spouse comes up and says, hey, when you left this morning, you forgot this one thing. What do you got to say about it? Blow up, brains on the walls. It's not very cute situation. When we go back to what we went to last week, we talked about the individual of who could be an empath. One who is empathetic is an empath, one who knows what you're going through. I don't know if there's a word called a sympath, but we'll use it today. A sympath is an individual who feels what you're feeling. So in the end, no sense of empathy is rooted, if it's not rooted in sympathy, which is not rooted in love, then you will never actually feel what someone's feeling. You will never be able to help them go through what they're going through. If we look at Pharaoh's situation and just go, it's kind of fun. Yeah, Haman got hung, yeah. The Egyptian army got swallowed in the army, in the seas. Yeah, but we must remember those were people who could have, and we wish they would have turned their hearts to the Lord. Often in this country we see Republicans versus Democrat, right versus left, America versus China. Who are we fighting now? China? We don't even know right now. And whoever it is versus whoever it is. Should we not be praying that those would turn and soften their hearts to the Lord? If we're not praying that, shouldn't we pray that our hearts might be softened and turned towards the Lord? If you think you have no enemy, then you haven't met yourself. Our Messiah, Yeshua, cried, and he is our example. It tells us that he is not only the Son of God. He's not just the Son of God who doesn't care. He's not some mean Messiah. We can see throughout the world history that when we cried out, God sent a Redeemer. Samson, he sent some people that did not serve the God of Israel. We've got some weird prophets and kings that didn't seem like they would ever follow the God of Israel that ended up being Messiah figures to our people. Sometimes we looked at this person and said, there's no way this person could lead me in righteousness, yet God used them. We could say this political candidate for president or whatnot, there's no way that this unrighteous person could lead me and lead this country into righteousness. Oh, you don't know the power of God, do you? You've never heard of Nebuchadnezzar, have you? You've never heard of the pharaohs before these pharaohs, have you? God can work through anyone. And God does work through anyone. He does whatever he wants. I'm just going to say that. He states that he heard our cry as also we have heard our cry. First, our love and compassion for each other, our sympathy for each other was strong, and then the Lord answered it. God doesn't come to save us as individuals. He comes to save a nation of people. His covenant is not just a covenant between him and Abraham. His covenant is for all of us. Now, us on a personal level accept that covenant. We also sign that document of covenant. But we do not serve a God who would only save Israel, who would only save the Jewish people, who would only save people who are righteous and perfect and love him just in a great way. God has a desire that none should perish. And we must also have the same unction that none should perish, the same desire that none should perish. When we look at God through these portions, we look at God through the Bible, we look at God through our own lives, we must use it as an example. And we must say, wow, what sympathy our God has, that he would even allow each and every one of us to wake up in the morning. For the sins we made yesterday, the transgressions, the iniquities that we have done in our lives, what a God of sympathy to allow us to even live in a country where we can talk about our God and read from a Torah scroll openly. What a God we serve, what sympathy.